To me, freshwater fishing is much more than just catching fish. It's almost a way of life, and every moment of it is recorded here in my fishing diary. Now, the entries here show days of coldness and despair, mingled with periods of pleasure and occasional glimpses of absolute paradise. But it's winter time, and many of the coarse fish now reach their peak condition. Pike, chub, perch, and the magnificent grayling provide superb sport in all but the most prolonged cold spells. And whilst all this is happening, trout and salmon are busy spawning amidst the solitude and darkness of countless rain-swept moorland streams. David Hunt is a river keeper on a stretch of the River Wharfe, and it's his job to maintain a healthy stock of trout for the fishermen. It's late November, which marks the start of David's busiest period of the year. By now, the trout are anxious to make their way up the streams and tributaries in search of the gravel beds or redds, where they'll eventually spawn.
David, why are the fish going to make this difficult and perilous journey up this stream to spawn, rather than actually spawn in the main river?
Well, if they were to spawn in the main river, the survival rate of the eggs would be very low due to the turbulent nature of the river and the predation upon the eggs and the fry, particularly the fry. So they ascend these streams to find a safer place for spawning, and they go up towards the headwaters where they'll find fine gravel where they can cut the redds, and it's a nursery environment.
And of course the fish that have actually spawned drop back down into the river away from the hatching fry, so they're not going to eat them. And I suppose you get the odd pair that actually do spawn in the river.
Yes, we've already had some spawn in the river, but I think the chances of survival of their fry are very, very low in this particular river anyway.
Yeah. David, this is one of the feeder streams where the trout are about to spawn. It's about 3 foot wide, turbulent in places, quiet in others. The bed is a mixture of large boulders, medium-sized stones and gravel. Whereabouts are the fish going to choose to spawn?
Well, they spawn in the tail end of the pool, where the flow is constant and where also the bed rises up and has an effect of pushing the water up and through the gravel.
That's here where we are.
So in this area, yes. So that once they've dug the red and laid the eggs, covered it back over, the water is still pushing up through the gravel, keeping the eggs oxygenated.
They'd choose a bed that was a mixture of small stones and...
Yes, they get rid of the silt first and then lay in amongst this sort of gravel.
And then just push it all back over the eggs, and they settle there for the winter until they hatch.
That's right, yeah. And,
To maintain a well-stocked fishery, the river keeper needs to raise some fish in the protected environment of a hatchery. But the natural spawning process still remains important, and we were able to witness the early stages of that process when David took me to a small pool a little further upstream.
Well, David, we're lucky to be able to see a pair of fish actually in this pool. They're almost ready to spawn now.
Yes, that's right. Yes, they've been having a go at digging in the gravel there. You can see on the right-hand side.
Yeah, and from the movements they're making now, that will be the female actually cutting the red.
Yes, well, it's turning on its side and making that flapping motion to cut the red that's displaced the gravel and create a depression in order that she can lay the eggs.
And all that the male fish is doing at this point is standing guard, really.
That's right, yes, he's just waiting for his moment to fertilise the eggs.
Yes, and protecting the female from the attentions of any other male fish in that pool. There is
that's right,
one
yes, that's a pair, yeah.
Because there is a little small cockfish in here and it keeps driving it away.
That's right, yes.
Well, that's excellent, David. It's a privilege to be able to see them, and I think we'll just leave them in peace now.
For David Hunt, the job of raising trout in the hatchery starts by catching the mature fish in cages as they move up the feeder streams to spawn. In the wild, a 3-year-old female trout will lay about 200 eggs. Most will hatch, but less than 10 will survive the first year. And when one considers the current demands being made on fisheries, this makes the work of the hatchery all the more important. The fish are graded into male and female. Light pressure on either side will extrude either the milt or the eggs. There's always the odd fish that's reluctant to give up its eggs, though usually all most of them need is a little coaxing. And those that aren't ripe and ready are immediately returned to the stream. Having separated the fish, the eggs can then be stripped from the female into a bowl. It's a gentle process which David, who's been doing this for many years, carries out with great care and dexterity. Once stripped of its eggs, the parent fish is returned safely to the water, hopefully to come back next year. The eggs are then fertilised by milt from the male. A little water is also washed over them to activate the milt. Fusion between eggs and milt must take place quickly, as the sperms will only survive for about a minute. A little gentle stirring and fertilisation is complete. Perforated metal trays set into troughs of constantly flowing spring water imitate the natural gravel of the streams. Onto these trays are placed the fertilised eggs, which, depending upon the temperature of the water, should hatch out about 7 weeks later. The eggs must be carefully spread out so that each one has a continuous supply of moving water around it. Then, it's simply left to nature to run its course. Dark, dreary December is upon us, although much beauty remains to be seen by the angler, no more so than here on the River Wharf.
This is a rain-fed river. In summertime there is a superabundance of food for the fish. Flies are hatching through the surface of the water, and a whole host of beetles and insects live in the riverbank vegetation. But in wintertime it's quite a different matter. The banks are devoid of vegetation and the river looks cold and cheerless. But down there, below the surface of the water, in amongst the stones, protecting themselves from the floods, are a whole range of nymphs and other forms of insect life. And by going into the river and turning over one of the stones, you can see those insects. And it is these insects upon which the trout and the grayling live during the wintertime. And they do live reasonably well. The food is really quite abundant.
The grayling. It's a pretty fish, but in certain waters where it actively competes with the trout for food, it's sometimes frowned upon by the purist trout angler. It's also an enigma, for it spawns at the same time as the coarse fish such as roach and perch, even though it's a relation of the trout and salmon.
Wintertime is the prime season of the year for grayling fishing. Usually it's absolutely bitterly cold and I'm bait fishing. But today the weather's mild, beautifully mild, and I'm going to try the artificial fly. Now the flies that I'm going to use are these. Firstly, that represents the nymphs that we've already seen under the stones. This one, that's the good old Yorkshire standby, the winter brown. It's a very good imitation of the little flies that are hatching out in this mild weather. And that one, well, that represents absolutely nothing. It's just a concoction of silver and red, but there are times when the grayling absolutely love them. Well, here we are grayling fishing in the middle of one of the most unusual winters that I've ever experienced. The weather has been mild and dry for weeks on end, and consequently the usual snow and ice that we've come to expect by this time of the year has not materialised. Well, it's a delight to be fishing in these conditions, but the problem is this. At this time of year I could say almost exactly where the fish were lying, because after a period of frost and snow the river temperature drops quickly. The grayling shoal together in the warmest part of the river, and that's usually one of the rather slow running glides where the water's deep. But at this year, well, they could be anywhere because the water temperature is still quite warm. So what I've decided to do, I've decided to fish down a pool where I've got a streamy run coming in at the head, and then it all dissolves into quite a deep glide under the far bank, and I'll fish down it very quickly in the hope that somewhere along here I'm going to find exactly where the grayling are. Another thing about the grayling is that it has to feed regularly all the winter time, because unlike the trout, which spawns in late November, early December, the grayling will spawn in April and May, and so it's now getting as much food as it possibly can in order to build up its fitness ready for the spawning season. So they are hungry fish. They're looking for as much food as possible. Also, they are extremely fit. They are sporting fish at this time of year. Catch one in the middle of summer and it's rather a weak and flaccid fish. But at this time of year they're agile, they're strong, and they give great sport. I like to fish my flies rather higher in the water than would be normal during the winter time, because although the grayling lie on the bottom and rise to the flies, I'd rather have them rising to the flies than the fly being actually down on the bottom where the grayling are, because if they're down at the bottom of the river, the flies are down at the bottom of the river, the grayling can take the fly in and spit it out before you know anything about it. Whereas if the flies are fishing around about mid-water height, the grayling has to rise to take the fly, it turns back down to the bottom with the fly, you feel the small pull, the small twitch, and it enables you to strike and make contact with it. Keep getting one or two pulls here, so I think I'll just persevere and stay still for a few moments. And there's a fish. Ah, now. Can't just see what it is yet, but fighting rather deep. That's a grayling. Beautiful. Just taking a bit of line now. I'm hoping to be able to show you how it uses its back fin, the high dorsal fin, to fight in the water. There you can see how it puts the fin up in the water to try and... I think it's just about tired now. Bring it into the net. Very gently. Nearly fell in. Over the net, and there it is. Oh, well. There it is, we found the right spot very quickly there. Grayling don't grow as large as the trout do in this river, but that's a very nice fish. It's one that's worth keeping because they make splendid eating. So I think that's the one I'm going to keep. And it's absolutely beautiful. This lilac shading along the flank, which gradually merges into this beautiful metallic silver with a few black spots underneath. Perhaps the most distinctive feature is this dorsal fin. It's huge compared with the majority of freshwater fish. Has lovely black spots on a beautiful deep red background. A deeply forked tail, And this little fin here, quite insignificant, that is the adipose fin, but it's that fin that relates this fish to the salmon and trout family. Another feature of the grayling is the position of the mouth. The mouth is positioned underneath the snout of the fish, and this means that the fish is primarily designed to feed off the bottom of the river. And perhaps the final distinctive feature is the eye. The pupil of the eye is pear-shaped, and that is quite unusual.
As the temperature drops, the fish gradually lose interest. So a lovely day on the wharf draws to a close. Only one fish, but every moment at the waterside in winter is a bonus. This is the grayling I caught earlier in the day. It's a beautiful plump fish, and I brought it home to eat. Having cleaned it, you can see the lovely firm flesh, slightly pink, and it means that this fish is in the peak of its condition. And whilst I was cleaning it, I thought it would be a good idea just to have a look at what this fish had been feeding on. And here on this dish are the contents of its stomach. And that displays a whole host of insects, flies, one or two beetles and one or two nymphs, and that evidence justifies my decision today to fish the fly. It's now early January, and I'm back at the hatchery with David to check on progress with the trout eggs.
Well, David, it's about 7 weeks since you put the fertilised eggs into the trays, and now things are beginning to happen. Can you just explain what's happening here?
Yes, after about 3 weeks, the eggs became eyed.
Yes,
eyed
those
over.
are like little black marks
That's
in
the
them,
little
yes.
black dots that you can see, yes. And then after about 47 days, they start to hatch, and you can see there's one or two in here that are starting to hatch today.
Just splitting the shell of that egg,
yeah,
yes.
that's right, just
yes.
splits open, and then out pops a little fish that's called an alvin,
Yes.
which
like these here,
these
yes,
in there, yeah,
yes.
these hatched last week.
And they've got their own little food supply attached to them in that yolk sac.
That's right, yeah. That will sustain them for about a week, 10 days, perhaps a fortnight.
Yes,
and
just a globule of oil and some blood.
yeah.
And then you'll begin to feed them.
Yes, I'll begin to feed them very soon now, these, and that's critical time. They've got to start to feed.
Yes. And how long will it be, David, before they actually look like little fish, like little trout?
Well, they'll look like little trout in about 2 months, I suppose, something
Yes.
like that, yeah.
And how good has the hatching been this year?
Yes, it's been quite good. We've maintained a constant temperature, or very constant temperature in here, and so they've been hatching in about 49, 50 days, and they should all come off at about the same time, yeah.
So we've got an excellent stock of fish for the coming years.
Well, we should have, yes, yes.
Hatchery-raised fish all tend to be a similar size, whereas in the wild, due to competition for the available food, they show considerable variation. These trout hatched 1 year ago. Now they're about 4 inches long and beautifully marked. Eventually they'll find their way into these large tanks, which now hold fish that are ready for the river.
David, as a fisherman, this is the exciting bit, to be standing in front of a tank of 2-year-old fish that in a few short weeks will be ending up in the river as the stock fish for the next season. About how large are the fish in here?
Well, they're anything from about 9 to 11 inches, some are bigger.
Yeah, and that's the size that you like to stock, is it?
Yes, this is the size I like to stock. I think they settle in quicker with the residents that are already in the river.
Yes.
They adapt more quickly, I think, and there's not an over-demand then on the food supply.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the stocking time in the spring, I suppose you've got to be very careful about the time you choose.
Yes, we want settled river conditions so that the fish have a chance to settle in to the river. So I shall hope for a fairly dryish spell with low water, so that when I put the fish in, they don't all get swept away, because they won't be used to river conditions.
Yeah. And they'll need a warm spell to have a reasonable food supply.
Well, yes, in the spring should be some flies hatching, so there'll be something for them to eat.
Well, we're now into February. There's a hint of spring in the air, but winter still has a firm grip on the countryside. And this is an excellent time to fish for pike. The pike is a very unpredictable fish. I can't say in advance what is going to be a good day for pike fishing. But generally, a few mild, drizzly days following a cold spell are usually productive. But there are many exceptions to that, so many that prophesying about pike fishing is a very unrewarding occupation. But one thing you can be certain of, that if you want to catch a large pike in the peak of condition, full of savage energy, and this is the time to do it. Now, I was taught to fish for pike by an old Norfolk farmer, and that old boy used to catch 30-pounders every year. And he had one golden rule about pike fishing: December good, January better, February best. And I've always stuck with that. Well, this is a red letter day for me. I usually fish for pike in the fens of East Anglia, but today I've come to one of the lakes at Nostell Priory in Yorkshire. This is a superb mixed course fishery, and the magic about this place is that anyone can fish it by purchasing a day ticket. And my companion today is John Osterfield. John is fishery manager at Nostell Priory, a skilled angler and a very experienced pike fisherman. And I'm sure that my knowledge of pike fishing will be greater at the end of today.
Morning, Derek.
What a marvellous day.
It's beautiful.
What do you think conditions are like for catching pike today?
At the moment they're good, but I think as the day goes on, the sun climbs high in the sky, it'll get harder.
Anything doing so far?
No, I've only just cast 2 rods in at the moment.
Where do you think I ought to start?
We could try that channel up there. It's nice and deep and there's plenty of cover from the old weed beds and the overhanging bushes. That's worth a try.
Yes, I'll leave you in peace. Good luck, John.
Thank you.
Pike spawn in April, but they suffer badly in the process and take a long time to recover. A summer pike is a poor fish, so really there's not much point in fishing for them before October. I found myself a beautiful quiet spot here, and I'm hoping that there's a few pike about, particularly under the bushes at the far side. Now, the method I'm using is called a dead bait technique, and it's very, very simple. All I've got is a normal float tackle, and on the hooks at the end are a dead fish, and occasionally that proves very attractive to pike. Now, it's not a very active way of fishing, but on a beautiful day like today, there's a calmness and a stillness about it which makes it very rewarding. I thoroughly enjoy an occasional day of this type of fishing. Also, when you come to the waterside, you tend to cause a disturbance, but the minute you sit down and you're quiet for a few minutes, all the wildlife comes back and you simply merge into the lakeside. It really is very, very peaceful. For many, many years, the pike was ruthlessly exterminated. It was felt that its introduction into a waterway, either a lake, a river or a canal, would mean that all the other fish would cease to exist. It would eat them all. Now there's a rather more enlightened attitude to the pike. It is seen as a beneficial addition to a good mixed course fishery. They keep the fish populations at a sensible level and they get rid of all the diseased and dying fish. But in a slow-running trout stream and the lower reaches of a salmon river, then it's a very different matter. They can do a great deal of damage. A pike will increase its weight quite considerably. A pike will also require about 4 or 5 times its body weight in food in a year. So let's say a 10-pound pike needs 50 pounds of the fish a year. Well, at £1 a week, that pike can get the whole of its food for that week in 2 grabs, like that. It can happen in 20 minutes. And for the next 6 days, that pike just doesn't need to feed. And if you're fishing on the day when they're hungry, then you're going to have a red letter day. But if you come on the other 6 days, the weather conditions can be exactly the same, you'll just catch absolutely nothing. The tackle associated with pike angling has improved tremendously, and much of it reflects the enlightened attitude to the conservation of the pike. Electronic bite detectors, barbless hooks and soft knotless nets are now standard equipment. It's a lovely, soft winter's day, but it's not always like this. The lakes can be icebound for weeks on end, and when that happens, the angler can only wait impatiently in the hope that a thaw will come before the season closes. John, like me, chooses to use the deadbait technique, but after fishing it unsuccessfully for several hours, I decided to change over to another method. I like spinning for pike. It's a very active method of fishing. You're constantly on the move. searching out those little holes under trees and in sheltered corners which you think might be fishy places. What you're really doing is you're casting out a bait, a metal bait, which you then wind back towards you, and in doing so the bait flutters and twirls, and it's trying to imitate a dead or a diseased, a dying fish. And the pike are quite ready to take that type of food. Pike isn't a very active fish. It's not going to move very far to take its food because it knows very well that if it keeps undercover, keeps camouflaged, keeps out of sight, then the food is going to come towards it.
A long, patient wait ends when the bite detector tells John that a pike is showing interest in his bait.
John, a fish.
At last.
A fish, just when I thought things were getting hopeless. Marvellous.
Just moving a bit to right there, the fish.
A bit dour at the moment, isn't it?
Got some weed on it.
It's running to the weed bed and
Yeah.
we're pulling some weed in with it. That'll have the effect of subduing it a bit, won't
That's
it, as
it,
well?
yeah.
Yes.
Just blankets it up.
Yes.
Can you just slide the net under?
Yeah.
It's not a big fish, but a fish. Try it in steady. All right.
Just found.
Just bring it to the back away from the water.
Yes, okay. Look at that. Isn't that a beautiful fish?
Not too bad, Derek.
Isn't that gorgeous? Congratulations, John. Well done. Superb.
Just a quick turn of the hook. Took it really well.
Savagely, that, didn't it?
Savagely.
Fantastic. What a beautiful fish. The first thing to note about it is the colouring. Dark olive green on the back, lighter green with these white spots on the side, and this pure white underneath. That's perfect camouflage for a fish that lives in and amongst the weeds. At the rear of the fish, the dorsal fin, a huge fin, another large fin, the anal fin, and the tail, all closely congregated together. And that gives that fish the ability to move in short bursts very, very quickly. It can dash out of the reeds and seize a fish. The next point is the eyes. They're set rather high on the head so that it gives a marvellous vision forwards and upwards. And of course that massive mouth and those impressive teeth. That's a pure predator. It's late winter now, and I've come to the Northumbrian coast at a point where the River Tweed meets the sea after its long journey through the Scottish borders. And excitingly, in this estuary, salmon are arriving, milling about, waiting for a flood to lift them up into the river proper. Now, like all salmon rivers, any fish that arrives here between the end of December and the middle of April, irrespective of the season, is called a spring salmon. And spring runs are in decline generally. The fish are simply arriving much later in the year. But when spring finally arrives, I'm going to come back to this river in the hope of catching one of these magnificent and elusive fish.
And that spring comes in A Fisherman's Diary tomorrow at the same time.